Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share. If there are topics that you would like to see explored, please send them to us through our website at jdlevyassociates.com.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Today we have a really special guest with us, Bill Stanczykiewicz from the Indiana University School of Philanthropy, where he is the Assistant Dean of External Affairs and directs the Fundraising School. I've known Bill for many years and have had the pleasure of building a friendship, both professionally and personally with him, and have a lot of varied experiences. And today we are going to discuss the board and its role in creating impact in fundraising. And for many of you, you've seen this topic, we've written about it, you've been trained around it, you engage in it yourself, and there's always a common thread in the area of fundraising, which is hesitancy often by board members in getting engaged in fundraising. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in the field, we talk about it in our company at the Fundraising School, is for volunteers to know how to get engaged in fundraising. We first have to make sure that we know that we're talking about the truth of what fundraising is and not something that has been devolved into something that it's not. And understanding what it truly means to give people an opportunity to invest in and share in the values they have with a cause that they care about. And to start us off, Bill, I would just share, maybe if you could share a couple of thoughts on what you see in the field of things that you have found working with boards that have created impact, whether that's you doing direct work, teaching, your own experiences, managing leaders over the years. Wherever you want to take us, we're on board to go with you.
Well, Jamie, thanks for the invitation. I've been fundraising in the nonprofit sector for nearly 25 years, and the opportunity to get to know you and serve alongside you during that time is definitely one of the highlights of my professional journey. So I'm absolutely delighted to be with you on your podcast. When we look at boards, the board of directors needs to be the first donors and the first fundraisers for the nonprofit organization. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, first of all, is legal. The board is legally responsible for the organization. When a nonprofit sets up, the nonprofit needs to demonstrate at least 3 board members before the local state government provides that approval. And then the federal government's going to ask the same thing before providing approval. So the board comes first. They're legally responsible. And if the folks who are legally responsible aren't donating, why should anybody else? And then we look at our board members as developing prospect lists of other folks who can donate, including foundations and corporations, as well as, of course, as individuals. And again, if the board members aren't donating themselves, how can we ask anybody else to donate? How can they ask anybody else to donate? So when we recruit people to our boards, we need to be very clear about expectations that in addition to the 8 or 9 other responsibilities that they have as board members, one of those responsibilities is serving as a donor and serving as a fundraiser for the nonprofit organization.
So excellent points, Bill, and thank you for that. A question I have, just something I hear in the field a lot, I'm sure you hear it a lot. Well, my board members say that they give their time, so they can't give their money. Or they're not going to give their money because they're giving lots and lots of time. How do you respond to that when you hear it?
Well, nonprofits need income. We can't pay our payroll with the board members' time, and we need, whether it's earned income, whether it's, grants, certainly sponsorships from businesses, but also donations from individuals. Cash is king, and we need those financial reserves to pay our expenses. And so if we're going to develop financial revenues from others, we need to develop those revenues first from board members. And again, this needs to be explained up front. We need clear expectations before anybody joins our board, that there's this understanding that they will financially donate once a year to their highest level of capability, and then they will provide prospect lists to help us fundraise from others. So one way we can help board members see this is to have them not create the misperception that we only want them for their money. We need to explain the other responsibilities that board members have. First of all, they are responsible for the overall strategy of the organization. The strategic plan is the board's plan, not the staff's plan. They then hire the CEO if the nonprofit is large enough to have paid staff, and they need to be informed by that CEO, keep the CEO accountable, but also keep the CEO encouraged. And so that's another responsibility. Financial oversight, keeping an eye on the budget planning, as well as the budget execution, using your Rolodex, your contact list to get the word out about the organization, making sure other legal details are followed, such as, ensuring that the 990 is filled out every year, for example, making sure the registered agent document is up to date at state government, different aspects of that nature. Again, there are many different responsibilities that board members have as being legally responsible for the organization, of which one is fundraising. And if they understand those other responsibilities, now they see why the fundraising is important, why the fundraising is essential, and why the donating and fundraising are part of that broader whole in their entire list of responsibilities.
Really good thoughts, Bill. Do you ever run into in the field someone who says, well, I don't believe that the board is really responsible for fundraising? I know everything that you've just shared is right on. Do you ever get that in response and be able to then take them back to just what you've said? Are there other elements that you answer that even more poignantly with, as far as the person who says, I agree that people need to do this, but I can't find where it says that my board is truly responsible for fundraising?
Both anecdotally and statistically, Jamie, I've seen that to be true. Anecdotally, towards the end of 2019, I was privileged to teach a series of workshops to the Hillel National Conference, folks who are providing ministry to our Jewish students on college campuses across the United States. And I did a couple of sessions on board engagement with fundraising. And it led to kind of a spirited discussion when I mentioned that we should have 100% board giving. It was something that folks said is easier said than done. And I shared with them that they're correct. But it's a challenge that they're seeing as they develop their boards at their local college campuses. We also know statistically from the good folks at BoardSource, they do a survey every other year called Leading with Intent, where they receive responses from about 1,400 nonprofit CEOs from across the United States. And only 40% of those CEOs in the most recent survey said that their boards actively participate in fundraising.
Wow.
So this is a huge gap. When nonprofits are saying they're challenged with fundraising, my first question is, tell me about your board. And if your board is not fully engaged, it doesn't mean you can't fundraise, but fundraising is going to be so much more difficult. Conversely, when you have 100% board giving, when you have all board members providing prospect lists, ideally going with you on some of those meetings, or at the very least, making the first phone call or the first email to set up the meeting for the CEO. Conversely, fundraising has a chance to grow exponentially because of the involvement of those leading volunteers.
Right. And that's a great point when you say exponentially, because when now all of a sudden it's not the shoulders of just a development person or a couple development individuals, depending on the size in the ED, but 10 or 15 others who are standing with us in partnership. It transforms an organization. Bill, you've mentioned a couple times now the idea of creating a prospect list. And I can hear that term being misinterpreted by individuals in the field, as I know from just my own experience of saying, I didn't come onto this board to go out and talk to everybody and try to get them to love cats, for example, if I'm a cat loving organization. What I hear you saying, and I think you've used this as a backdrop, and if you could maybe expand on this, that we're not looking for a board member to go out and try to convert zebra lovers to loving cats, but we're asking them to find who do they believe shares in the values and the vision of the organization, and be willing then to become active in engaging those relationships. Am I hearing you correctly?
That's exactly right, Jamie. And so first thing we need to do is communicate the expectation up front that if you're going to join this board, here are the 9 or 10 expectations we have for you, all the responsibilities of board members, 2 of which are being a donor to the organization and helping us find other donors and other funders. But then as we move forward, what we do is, for example, one thing I did is I led a youth development nonprofit in Indiana for nearly 20 years. is we sat our board together at a special fundraising planning meeting every other year. And we said, okay, here's this program. Here's the impact of that program. Here's a typical donor to that program at a typical financial amount. Who in your contact list meets that description who could be interested in this particular program? Okay, next program. Here's the information. Here are the results. Here are the details. Here's a compelling story of outcome. Now, here's a typical donor at a typical financial level. Who do you know in your contact list who we can follow up with? And, Jamie, usually when board members are hesitant to fundraise, it's not that when they're saying, well, I'm giving my time or I'm involving my company, what they're really saying is they're afraid of asking people for money. And when they're communicating this kind of fear, they're afraid of hearing no and how that reflects upon them. And what we need to remind them is this is not about you, the board member. This is about the cause. This is about the vision. And what you are doing is you are inviting that prospective donor to join you in making the world a better place. It just so happens the way they can do that is with a financial gift. So we need to help our board members take themselves personally out of this so that they don't feel awkward, so they don't feel weird or odd if they hear no, because again, it's not about them. It's not even about the nonprofit. It's about the cause that the nonprofit is addressing, the people being served, the issue being addressed, the arts that are being uplifted, the environment that's being cared for, and so forth. That's why they're forming that communication, forming that relationship, and they're not asking for money. They're inviting that prospective donor to join them in making the world a better place.
It's a really, really good point, Bill. And you've mentioned something really profound, not just as it relates to fundraising, but especially in all areas of an organization, which, technically we could say any sector. And that is what I also hear you saying is that as it relates to fundraising, but also I would extrapolate that into all areas. When our own comfort zones violate what's best for the organization, then the people we serve are going to suffer. And so often, especially in all parts of an organization, but I hear you say, especially with the board, is that a board member has to be willing to not allow their comfort zone to dictate what the organization needs, but rather understand what the organization needs and then adapt to how I can be the best person in that role.
Everyone who's engaged with fundraising, whether they be on professional staff or volunteers, including board members, need to see themselves as the bridge between desire to make a difference on behalf of the donor and the opportunity to make a difference, which the nonprofit is fulfilling. And when the board member is opening the doorway to that prospective donor, they are an ambassador on behalf of those children who are low income, who are being served, those victims of domestic violence who are being served, those new residents of our nation who are being served, that faith, religious faith that's being promoted, the environment that's being cared for, the arts that are being uplifted, the community that's being developed. The folks in those causes don't have access to that donor, to that source of wealth. The board member does. And just like you could be an ambassador to an international location, you are the ambassador of that cause to that prospective donor. Take yourself out of it and instead see yourself as representing that cause. And that's our best opportunity to disabuse folks of any hesitancy that they might have around fundraising.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Bill. So, what I hear you saying as a recap, ensure that we have clarity of expectation for our boards, that we help frame what fundraising is, and that we ensure they understand how they can be a part of it and equip them in doing so. But then the big takeaway, I'm really thinking about two things that you've said that really stick to me. One is I love your idea of profiling what a donor could look like to this organization or to this program, and equipping, along with helping know how to translate, et cetera, a board member. But then lastly, making sure that we don't make it about us, but rather we make it about the cause and the people that we're serving. Excellent points, Bill. But I sure appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. You've given us a lot to think about. You've helped really challenge even some ways I connect dots, which is so fun, always is the case when I'm with you. So I truly appreciate your taking the time and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Jamie, I look forward to the next opportunity for Pathways to Intersect. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.